you will recall that between July and August, the RBI had come out with a principle-based resolution framework to address borrower defaults under a normal scenario. This was pre-COVID, that there was a prudential framework which laid down principles as to how should your uh, resolution plan be, what should be the constituents of those plans, what should be the principles to be kept in mind. Now the pandemic has made this situation further more difficult. We are already seeing a lot of stress in the economy. We are seeing stress that corporates are facing. And therefore, if there is any specific uh, impact that the borrowers are facing, and that is purely on account of a COVID, uh, they could also be able to avail the restructuring plans. So basically, the restructuring plan helped them to maintain their status as standard assets subject to certain conditions around DPD as on 1st March being satisfied. If those were satisfied, if those were met, then the asset could continue to be classified as a standard asset even if there is a restructuring. Finally, the August circular that the RBI came out with also suggested that an expert advice or an expert committee was set up to identify what should be the boundary conditions within which those sectors having impacted because of COVID could get benefit of the resolution plans. So this expert committee basically looked at all the various sectors that were impacted by COVID, and for 26 sectors, they have come out with 5 financial parameters as to boundary conditions for companies who can be eligible to avail the resolution plan or who can avail the resolution plan. Some of those include what is the total outstanding loans to the total net worth, what is their debt to EBITDA ratio, what are the current service ratios, what is the debt service coverage ratios. These are the ratios where they prescribed against each sector what those numbers should be. The moment you breach that sector, that number, your company is not eligible to be in the plan. For certain sectors, they've just stated that the board should have a consistent policy and go ahead and apply. So if the sector to which the bank has lent does not fall within these 26 sectors, then basically the board approved policy should be reasonable, applied consistently, and they should go ahead with this. With respect to provisioning, as part of the resolution, if there is any lender who does not sign the intercreditor agreement, the provision they need to make is higher of 20% of the amount or the one that is determined by the IRAC norms. So once again, the idea is to help companies tide over the current situation that they are facing. The next key update in terms of the changes that have been brought about by the RBI are basically that in many cases when NBFCs and ARCs calculate net owned funds, there is always a question of how do you treat unrealized gains arising on fair value of financial instruments, right? What the guidance states is basically if you have an unrealized gain or loss on a derivative transaction and that derivative is undertaken for hedging, you can offset it against the unrealized gain loss recognized either through P&L or OCI on the hedged item or the hedged instrument. If there is still any unrealized gain that is left over, then you exclude it from your calculations in regulatory capital. So then that gain cannot form a part of your net owned funds, you would need to reduce it. But you do now have the ability to set off the loss on the underlying item with the gain on the hedged item. Earlier, this loss had to be reduced from your capital with the unrealized gain being excluded. So it's a double whammy, which is now getting corrected. The other key update for the current quarter by the RBI is the guidelines on core investment companies have now undergone a change. To give you a quick background of what is required, RBI requires that a core investment company is one which only invests in its subsidiaries and group entities. So 90% or more of its assets have to be in a group entity and more than 60% have to be in equity shares of this entity. Now, a lot of times what happened is that there were groups which had more than one core investment company. Now, what that meant is that basically, because you had multiple core investment companies in a group, the amount of borrowings that you could take was getting significantly increased. So let's take an example. The RBI regulations state that if your capital is 100, you cannot have more than 275 rupees of external borrowings. So there's the CIC1, which has a capital of 100, takes a borrowing of 275. It now has 375 rupees of cash. This 375 rupees of cash, if it invests in another CIC, that CIC can raise another 375 rupees into 2.5 times the amount, which means that at a group level, they have 1100 rupees of debt, but core capital is only 100, right? So that's the extent of leverage that the RBI is trying to correct. And therefore, there are restrictions in terms of how much amounts can be invested by these CICs in other CICs. What is the number of CICs that are permissible within a group? There are also certain other benefits or enhancements in terms of the corporate governance requirements, and the disclosures in these financial statements have also been enhanced. Finally, CICs will have to CICs also have to set up a group risk management committee, where that group risk management committee is charged with ensuring governance at a group level. So from an accounting standpoint, if one had to have only two CICs, one would have to look at how the common control accounting applies. If you are an associate which needs to be moved, there could be a impact on the recognition of goodwill in this entity. So there could be a few accounting complexities, but there are 2 years available to fully implement this. So they are effective immediately, but the end date for compliance is 31st March 2023. Finally, we then come to some of